My name is Vivian. In the cold, calculated ledger of my parents' lives, I was never a daughter. I was an investment with a high maintenance cost and a questionable return. On my 18th birthday, while other girls were receiving keys to cars or heirloom jewelry, I was handed a leather-bound folder. Inside was not a gift, but an itemized bill. 18 years of caloric intake, every square meter of shelter, every tuition fee, and every piece of clothing adjusted for inflation. "We've raised you to be an asset, Vivian," my father told me, his voice as dry as a balance sheet. "And assets must pay for their own depreciation before they can claim a profit." They thought they were teaching me the value of money. They didn't realize they were actually teaching me the price of a soul, and that one day I would be the one setting the interest rates. The dining room of our estate felt like a courtroom. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the cold, sharp features of my parents, Julian and Eleanor. They sat at the head of the table, not as family, but as a board of directors presiding over a failed merger. $842,000, Vivian, my father said, sliding the final page of the document toward me. He tapped his gold fountain pen against the table with a rhythmic, irritating click. "That is the cost of your upbringing. We have deducted a 10% parental discount for basic emotional labor, but the rest is a debt you owe to this household." I looked at the lines of text. Pediatric visits, $12,400. Organic infant formula, $4,200. Private piano lessons, years 5 through 12, $48,000. It was a surgical dissection of my childhood. Every birthday cake was a line item. Every hug had been monetized. "You're joking," I whispered, my voice caught in the back of my throat. "This is a joke, right? I'm your daughter." "Family is a social construct, Vivian. Economics is a universal law," my mother replied, her eyes scanning me with the clinical detachment of an auditor. "We provided you with an elite foundation. Now it is time for the ROI, return on investment. Until this debt is cleared with a 5% annual interest rate, you are legally barred from any inheritance, any family connections, or any use of the Vane name. You start from zero. Or rather, you start from negative $842,000. "I have no money, Mother. I'm a student," I said, the shock finally giving way to a cold, crystalline clarity. "Then you'd better start working," she said, standing up and smoothing her silk skirt. "Security has already packed your personal belongings into 2 suitcases. They are waiting at the gate. Consider this your first lesson in the real world. Nothing is free, especially love." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I looked at the folder, then at the 2 people who had spent 18 years pretending to care while they were actually just keeping a ledger. I realized then that I wasn't leaving a home, I was escaping a bank. I walked out of that mansion with 2 suitcases and a burning, singular purpose. They wanted me to be an asset? Fine. I would become the most powerful asset they had ever encountered. I would learn the language of debt better than anyone alive. I would master the mechanics of the market, the psychology of the creditor, and the brutality of the collection agency. I spent the first night on a park bench, the folder tucked under my head like a pillow. I didn't sleep. I read every line of their invoice. I memorized the numbers. I treated it like a mission statement. If my life had a price tag, I was going to make sure that by the time I was finished, I would own the store. For the next few years, I disappeared into the underbelly of the financial world. I worked 3 jobs while attending university at night, living on black coffee and the raw energy of my own resentment. I didn't call, I didn't send letters. I changed my last name to something that sounded like a strike, Stone. I started in the debt collection industry, not the thugs who break windows, but the digital predators who buy distressed debt for pennies on the dollar and turn it into gold. I realized that debt is the most powerful weapon in the world. It can make kings crawl and turn palaces into dust, and I was very, very good at wielding it. I watched from afar as the years passed. My parents, once the titans of their social circle, began to age. They were arrogant. They thought their wealth was a permanent shield. They made bad investments, trusting the same cold logic they had used on me. They over-leveraged their estate, took out high-interest loans to maintain their lifestyle, and ignored the shifting tides of the global economy. They thought they had raised me to be a worker. They didn't realize they had trained a hunter. 12 years after I walked out of that gate, I sat in a glass-walled office in the heart of the financial district. My company, Electo Capital, had just finalized its largest acquisition yet, a portfolio of toxic personal debts from the city's elite banks. And right at the top of the list, marked in red, were the names Julian and Eleanor Vane. The total debt, including interest, late fees, and penalties, was exactly 10 times the amount they had billed me on my 18th birthday. I closed the file and looked at the reflection in the window. The girl who slept on a park bench was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly how much everything and everyone was worth. "Call the collectors," I told my assistant, my voice a calm, lethal hum. "But tell them I want to serve this particular notice in person. I want to see the look on their faces when they realize that the bill has finally come due."
The transition from a disowned daughter to a financial predator wasn't a cinematic montage of sudden success. It was a decade of systematic attrition. For the first 3 years, I lived in a space so small it felt like a coffin, working as a junior debt analyst by day and a freelance coder by night. I didn't just study finance, I dissected it like a cadaver. I wanted to understand the rot. I wanted to know exactly how a person's life could be reduced to a string of digits and then traded like a commodity. My parents had given me a bill for my existence, so I decided to become the person who owned the ledger of the world. I stopped being Vivian Vane, the girl who cried over a leather-bound folder, and became Vivian Stone, a woman carved from the very material they used to build their monuments. I started my own firm, Electo Capital, with a seed investment I earned by identifying a massive oversight in a distressed asset portfolio of a major bank. I didn't just find money, I found leverage. I realized that the wealthy are often the most vulnerable because they confuse their lifestyle with their net worth. They spend money they don't have to maintain an image they can't afford. My parents, Julian and Eleanor, were the perfect specimens of this particular pathology. While I was eating ramen in a basement, they were taking out secondary mortgages to fund charity galas and art collections. They thought their pedigree was collateral. I knew better. By the 5th year, I had developed a proprietary algorithm that tracked high-status defaults, wealthy families who were over-leveraged but too proud to declare bankruptcy. I watched my parents through the cold, unblinking eye of my software. I saw every late payment on their estate's maintenance. I saw the quiet sale of my mother's heirloom diamonds to cover a margin call on my father's failing tech investments. I saw the cracks in the facade before they even felt the draft. I didn't intervene. I didn't offer help. I waited. In the world of debt, timing is the difference between a settlement and a conquest. "The Vane accounts are flagging again, Miss Stone," my lead strategist, Marcus, told me during a morning briefing. He pointed to a graph on the wall that showed a sharp downward trajectory. "They've just applied for a high-interest bridge loan through a private equity firm in the Caymans. They're desperate." "Who owns that firm, Marcus?" I asked, swiveling my chair to look at the rain-streaked windows of my Manhattan office.
technically a holding company called Nemesis Group, which, as we both know, is a subsidiary of Electo. Good, I said, my voice as flat as a dead heartbeat. Approve the loan. Give them the most predatory terms the law allows. Make sure the collateral is the house. Every brick, every portrait, every memory. I want it all tied to a single impossible balloon payment due in exactly 24 months. For the next 2 years, I watched them eat the poisoned bait. They used my money to pretend they were still the titans of the city. They hosted dinners on my dime. They bought suits and dresses with my interest rates. They were literally consuming their own destruction, and they were smiling while they did it. I received monthly reports on their spending habits. It was pathetic. My mother spent $20,000 on a youth restoring retreat, while her primary residence was technically owned by a woman she hadn't spoken to in a decade. I spent my time hardening myself. I took up boxing, not for the fitness, but for the discipline of taking a hit and waiting for the opening. I studied the law until I could recite the Fair Debt Collection Act in my sleep. I wanted everything I did to be perfectly, agonizingly legal. I wanted them to know that their downfall wasn't a crime, it was a transaction. It was the real-world lesson they had promised me on my 18th birthday, delivered with professional precision. As the 24-month mark approached, the global economy took a predictable dip. The interest rates spiked. The balloon payment loomed over their mansion like a guillotine blade. I started buying up their smaller debts, credit cards, unpaid staff wages, local club memberships. I wanted to be their only creditor. I wanted to be the only person they had to answer to. I moved their files from the active folder to the collection folder. I remembered the day they kicked me out. I remembered the way my father clicked his pen. I remembered the parental discount my mother had mentioned. I decided right then that there would be no discount for them, no mercy, no family sentiment. I would be the cold, impartial hand of the market. The payment failed this morning, Marcus said, walking into my office on a Tuesday. He laid a single sheet of paper on my desk. The Vane estate is officially in default. They tried to call the Cayman's office begging for an extension. They sounded old, Vivian. Old is not a financial status, Marcus, I replied, standing up and smoothing the front of my charcoal gray blazer. It's a biological one. Prepare the seizure notices. We're moving in. Do you want the legal team to handle the physical service? He asked. No, I said, picking up a leather-bound folder I had kept for 12 years. Inside was the original bill they had given me, yellowed at the edges but perfectly legible. I've been waiting 12 years to personally deliver the receipt. I'll go myself. I looked at my reflection in the elevator mirror on the way down. I didn't see a daughter. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had calculated the cost of every tear she had shed and added it to the principal. My parents had raised me to be an asset. Now it was time for the asset to collect the debt. The drive to the estate was long, the familiar iron gates appearing through the mist like the entrance to a prison I had finally outgrown. I didn't feel nervous. I felt a profound surgical calm. The game was over, the ledger was balanced, and the interest had finally eclipsed the original cost of my life. The iron gates of the Vane estate didn't creak. They hummed with the silent, expensive precision of a security system I now technically owned. Driving up the long gravel path felt like navigating a graveyard of my own girlhood. I saw the oak tree where I wasn't allowed to climb because bruises were an unsightly medical expense, and the fountain where I wasn't allowed to splash because water bills must be justified by utility. Every inch of this property was a line item in the folder sitting on my passenger seat. I parked my black sedan directly in front of the grand entrance, blocking their view of the manicured lawn. I didn't rush. I took a moment to adjust my cuffs and check my reflection. I looked like the personification of a hostile takeover. The front door was opened not by a butler, they had fired the last of the staff 3 months ago, but by my father. Julian Vane looked like a hollowed-out version of the man who had sat at the head of the table 12 years ago. His suit was wrinkled, and his hands, once so steady as he clicked his gold pen, were trembling. He didn't recognize me at first. He saw the expensive car, the sharp suit, and the professional coldness, and he mistook me for a savior. "You must be from the agency," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, come in. My wife and we've prepared a proposal for a debt restructuring. There's been a temporary liquidity issue, but our assets are substantial." "Your assets are currently 0, Julian," I said, stepping past him into the foyer. I didn't use the word father. I used his name like a label on a faulty product. He froze. The sound of my voice, though deepened by years of command, carried a frequency he hadn't heard in over a decade. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me in the light of the crystal chandelier, a chandelier that was now technically item number 42 on my repossession list. "Vivian," he whispered, is that you?" "I'm the majority shareholder of Electo Capital, and I'm the primary creditor for every cent you owe. Where is Eleanor?" My mother appeared in the doorway, clutching a silk robe around her as if it were armor. She looked frail, the youth-restoring treatments failing to hide the gray exhaustion of financial ruin. When she saw me, she didn't run to hug me. She didn't cry. She simply stopped breathing for a second, her eyes darting to the leather-bound folder in my hand. "You," she breathed. "You're the one who bought the notes. You're the Nemesis Group." Market efficiency is a beautiful thing, isn't it? I sat down at the head of the mahogany table, the same chair my father had occupied when he gave me my bill. I laid the folder open. On one side was the original invoice of existence they had given me. On the other was the current notice of foreclosure for their entire life. "We raised you to be a success, Vivian. We gave you the tools to become this woman. You should be thanking us for the discipline we instilled. This is a family matter. Surely we can reach an arrangement." "This is an audit, Julian, not a reunion," I said, sliding the papers toward them. "You taught me that family is a social construct and economics is a universal law. I took your lesson to heart. I've spent 12 years perfecting the art of the return on investment. According to my calculations, the parental discount you offered me has long since expired. With interest, late fees, and the cost of the bridge loans you so greedily swallowed, you owe me exactly $8.4 million. "We don't have it," Eleanor sobbed, sinking into a chair. "The investments failed. The theater is gone. This house is all we have left." "Incorrect," I said, standing up and walking to the sideboard where a silver tea set sat gathering dust. "You don't have this house. I bought the deed from the Cayman firm yesterday morning. You are currently trespassing on my property. Every piece of furniture, every painting, even the clothes in your closets are now collateral for the debt you cannot pay." I watched the realization sink in. It wasn't the heat of an argument, it was the cold of a vacuum. I was sucking the air out of their world, just as they had sucked the hope out of mine on my 18th birthday. I felt no pity. I felt the satisfaction of a balanced equation. "You can't just throw us on the street," Julian said, his voice rising in a desperate, pathetic whine. "We're your parents. We gave you life." "And you billed me for it," I reminded him, tapping the original invoice. You put a price on my life, Julian. I'm just here to pay it in full. And as any good debt collector knows, when the principal cannot be met, we move to the seizure of assets. I pulled out a small digital camera and began taking photos of the room, documenting the inventory. The click of the shutter was the only sound in the room, a sharp, mechanical punctuation to their silence. I'll give you 24 hours to pack your personal items. Anything that isn't on the original list of my childhood expenses stays here. I'm taking back the interest you've accrued on my soul for the last 12 years. Tomorrow morning, the locks will be changed. The real world is waiting for you, mother, father. I hope you find the lessons as valuable as I did. I walked out the front door without looking back. Behind me, I heard the sound of my mother's first real sob and the frantic, useless clicking of my father's pen. They were finally learning the one thing they forgot to put on my invoice, the cost of being truly alone. The morning of the eviction was gray and clinical, the kind of weather that suits a repossession. I stood on the marble porch of the Vane estate, watching two men in gray uniforms haul the last of the unauthorized items toward a waiting van. My parents stood by the gate, looking like two refugees from a war they had started themselves. Eleanor was clutching a small plastic bag, all I allowed her to take of her personal effects, while Julian stared at the gravel, his shoulders slumped as if the gravity of his own debt was physically crushing him. They had no cars, no staff, and no prestige left. They were finally as zero as they had made me 12 years ago. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the stone. I held a single envelope in my hand. "The audit is complete," I said, stopping a few feet from them. "I've reviewed the liquidation of your remaining assets. The sale of the art collection and the secondary properties covered the principal of the bridge loans. The foreclosure on this house covers the interest. You are officially debt-free in the eyes of Electo Capital." "Debt-free?" Julian looked up, a flicker of pathetic hope in his eyes. "So we can stay? We can find a way to work this out?" "You misunderstand the term debt-free, Julian," I said, my voice cold and precise. "It means we have no further business. You owe me nothing, and I owe you even less. You are free to leave. My security team will escort you to the edge of the property. I've taken the liberty of booking you a room at a modest motel for 3 nights. Consider it a childhood discount for the years you didn't charge me for the air I breathed." "Vivian, please," my mother sobbed, her voice thin and reedy. "We're old. We have nowhere to go. How can you be so heartless? We gave you everything." "You gave me an invoice, Eleanor," I reminded her, pulling the original yellowed holder from my bag. "You taught me that every breath has a price. You taught me that love is an overhead cost that must be managed. I am simply the prize pupil of your own curriculum. You wanted an asset, you got one. But assets don't have hearts, they have margins, and yours have officially hit the bottom." I turned to the lead security officer. "Change the locks, set the perimeter alarms. This property is now a private investment holding. Any unauthorized entry is to be treated as a criminal trespass." As they were led away, Julian turned back one last time. "You'll regret this, Vivian. You're just like us. You're cold, you're calculating, and you'll die alone in this big empty house." "I'm not like you, Julian," I called out, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "I used debt to set myself free, and I won't be staying in this house. I'm putting it on the market tomorrow. I don't want your memories. I just wanted the capital you stole from my childhood." I watched them reach the gate. They looked small, insignificant against the backdrop of the empire they had failed to protect. I felt no surge of joy, no dramatic burst of emotion. I felt something much better, the quiet, profound satisfaction of a closed file. The ledger was balanced, the interest was paid. The girl who had slept on a park bench was finally, truly out of their shadow. I walked back into the house, my footsteps echoing in the empty foyer. The crystal chandelier was dark, the mahogany table was bare. I took the original folder, the one that had fueled my rage for over a decade, and walked to the fireplace. I struck a single match and watched the paper catch fire. I watched the invoice of existence turn into ash, the numbers curling and disappearing into the soot. The debt was settled. I walked out of the house, locked the front door, and tossed the keys into the fountain. I got into my car and drove toward the city, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. I had spent 12 years counting every penny, every slight, and every cold word. Now, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to count anything at all.